Welcome back to the Anti-Meta Meta Club. This week's Race C is a repeat of a Group 4 Brands hatch race that we've had, but the Anti-Meta car has changed. Let's get into it. The Anti-Meta car of the week is the NSX. Truthfully, nothing is really going to hold a candle to the 4C, which is the race pace meta car of the week. But it is powerful, it's nimble, it feels a lot better than the all-wheel drive cars, and it can definitely give someone who's maybe not quite as good as you a run for the money, even if they're in the meta car. I managed to put the NSX, which I believe is the only NSX in the top 100, in 8th place. The 4C Megane and the G70 are all viable cars, and I would consider all of those to be kind of like a triple meta, though the 4C is definitely the race pace meta. There are a few other cars in the top 100, but it looks like this is the only NSX. You'll see these three boards as soon as the lap starts, and right about the halfway point between the second and the final one is where you want to hit the brakes. Maximizing at about 50% brake pressure, I like to immediately start turning in trail braking, getting down to 3rd gear, and then popping it back up to 4th gear before getting on the throttle. If you do hit the grass, which I don't avoid, getting into 4th gear should allow you to accelerate without sliding. You do not want to slide because, of course, you can go off track or you'll just lose your momentum. Moving all the way back on track before you hit the brakes, you want to look for this red mark on the barrier to the left, and right after that is where you want to hit the brakes. Braking very hard initially, you want to immediately start trail braking in and immediately diving for the apex. This isn't going to be a double apex, but you're going to be very close to the inside. You want to get all the way to 1st and then turn in a little bit more off the brakes before you apex, and then back into 2nd gear before you get on the throttle. Track out really wide all the way up on this exit curb and then move all the way to the right to prepare for the next braking zone. Aiming to put your outside tires directly on this curb right here, you want to brake right when you get to the brown part before the red and white part of the curb. Again, only using about 50% braking, we're going to then downshift to 2nd gear to get to the apex, back up to 3rd before getting on the throttle, and you can go really wide here. You want to avoid touching the dirt or the grass because it can give you 2 dirty tires, and that will definitely mess up your next corner. Once again, all the way back on the track, and you're going to start looking for this brown curbing here on the right. In between the end of that brown curbing and the beginning of the red and white curbing is when you want to hit the brakes. Once again, using only about 50% brakes, you're going to turn in immediately, trying to get down to 2nd gear and get off the brakes as soon as you can. Steer in more and get on the throttle long before that white line that we just passed over. That should be your number one goal. Focusing on when to get on the throttle is going to be very important for this corner. I should take this time to mention that you don't actually need to tune whatsoever. I left this completely stock. I was doing some min-maxing with the tuning, but it's completely unnecessary. Approaching the corner at the end of this straight, we're actually going to look to the right side of the track. When you pass the red and green part of the barrier on the right, you're going to start turning in slightly and then adding brake after the weight has shifted. Very gentle braking all the way up to the apex in 4th gear before getting on the throttle gently is the key here. You don't want to bleed off speed too quickly, and you don't want to get on the throttle too quickly, of course, either. That will make you go off track. Once again, looking for the red part of the barrier, this time on the left. Right before that, you're going to hit the brakes, downshift to 3rd, and then start turning in at that last white board there on the left. If you take too much of this inside curb, it can actually make you understeer. So you want to just use a little bit of it. Just get your right tires barely past the red and white. If you do it correctly, you should be able to get on the throttle as soon as you clear it, and then track out here without going in the sand. If you go in the sand, it's all over. Staying wide while making sure that you don't track into the grass when you hit the brakes. You're going to wait till you get to this final whiteboard here on the right and then hit the brakes. You want to stay in 4th gear until you're about to apex, then dip down to 3rd gear and immediately get on the throttle as soon as you feel comfortable doing so. If you downshift to 3rd too early, you're going to bleed off too much speed, so you want to carry as much speed as you can to the apex, then floor it as you come out. Get yourself lined up on the right side of the track as early as you can, and about 1 car length before this final white board, you're going to hit the brakes, downshift to 3rd immediately, and then try to carry as much speed as you can while hitting this apex. Now, I hit it really early. I still got on the throttle, and even though I went all the way into the grass, I kept 2 tires on the curb, which actually kept my tires clean. I don't actually suggest doing this. You can apex a lot later and still carry the same speed. For the final braking zone, I actually want you to look all the way to the barrier on the left, to this green part right here. I want you to hit the brakes there, and then you're going to turn in at the white board right there. I want you to go all the way up on this curb or even in the grass, because if you get on the throttle before this crest, which you should do, it could push you all the way off the track if you're not tight enough to the right. So be very careful here and get all the way to the inside, even on the grass if you have to. To finish up, you want to hug all the way to the right. That'll ensure you're covering the least amount of distance and give you the shortest possible time. T1 goes really far down, and there's a lot of elevation change right here, and there's even a bigger crest after when you're supposed to get on the throttle, and that can cause you to go really far off track and understeer, so make sure you're really close to the apex. You're really hitting the apex there, or you're going to go off. You don't want to late apex that. Well, you do want to late apex it, but you don't want to go super deep in that really tight right-hand corner. You want to make sure that you're really close to the apex, and then you do finally hit the apex really late. It's very important to carry a lot of momentum into this corner because it is uphill, and it's also very important to get on the throttle early, so I like to make sure that I'm hitting the throttle way before that white line that you cross about halfway through that corner. Take note of exactly when I'm shifting. You want to wind this out as far as you can, of course, without hitting the rev limiter and the fuel cutter, because that will definitely ruin your momentum. This corner is about getting settled into the corner before adding brakes, and of course just using the brakes to keep it tight on the line that you want. This corner is also really tricky because when you go over that curb, it can cause understeer, so you've got to make sure you don't use too much of the curb, but of course you do want to use some of it. This corner also levels out, so it's really important that you're carrying a lot of speed, but also hitting that apex pretty late and making sure you continue to steer while you're adding throttle. And like I mentioned, you don't want to go super wide here. I actually lost momentum there. It's all because I apexed a little bit earlier. You can probably brake and turn in a little bit later than I did. This corner is really tricky because just like T1, there's a crest right after you want to get on the throttle, so make sure you're really hitting the apex, even going in the grass if you have to, or you're going to have a bad time and go in that sand. There are actually two completely viable strategies that you can use with this car alone in this race. I don't mean that this is the only car that can do the strategies. What I mean is this car can actually do both strategies quite well. The 4C is pretty similar, but you really do not need to take tires with the 4C, and that is why it is absolutely the meta car. You can still hit purple laps at the very end of the race, even without taking tires. I tried a little bit of both, and in this race I didn't take tires, so we're going to take a look at exactly what I did in order to make this race work without tires. If you know from the very beginning that you definitely want to do the race without taking tires, then it's really important to try to figure out at the very beginning exactly when you want to pit. Now, if you're starting from the back or close to the back, the general idea is that you want to pit just right at the beginning, right at the end of the very first lap. Now, this can be a bit tricky because with the people in front of you, if the people directly in front of you are going to go into the pits, it might behoove you to choose to wait another lap before going to the pits. Regardless of who's driving, when people are driving very close, it usually ruins the pace of at least one of the cars, usually the person behind, if not both, especially if the person behind is kind of chasing and getting really close and making the other person nervous. On top of that, you're going to get dirty air, and that can translate to worse tire wear as well as just worse overall pace. If it looks like maybe just the person directly in front of you is going into the pits, then it might not be too bad, especially if it's someone that you trust. Now, Clubsport pace in front, I know that he's a very fast driver. He's in the meta car, so if he's going to go in the pits by himself, there's a chance that I'd want to do so. But with this race, I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do before I entered it, and I was just going to kind of wait to see what the race was going to turn out to be. I think I had actually planned on potentially taking tires, but that didn't actually end up happening. Jumping to the end of the lap, you can see that Clubsport pace is actually signaling that he's going to go into the pits. And like I mentioned before, I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do, so I was just going to let him go by himself. It looked like another driver did go directly in front of him and potentially gave himself one of those annoying pit penalties, but either way, I wasn't really focused on that because I do think at this time I wasn't really planning on it. Either way, it's not necessarily a bad idea to just let people in front of you go to the pits because, like I always say, you want to go into the pits and come out completely by yourself. Jumping to the end of this lap, since I was unsure what I was going to do, I was going to kind of just wait and see, and it looked like both of the guys ahead were going to go in the pits, so I decided to just avoid the pits altogether one more lap. At the end of the next lap, it looked like I had a little bit of space ahead. I wasn't quite sure I was going to catch the people ahead, and since I was already putting in good pace, as long as I was able to go completely unhindered for 2 full laps, it could potentially put me in front of anyone who had gone to the pits already if I was able to maintain that pace all the way to when I hit the pit. But it became really apparent really soon that I had made a mistake. I probably should have gone to the pits just then, since I wasn't going to take tires, and that could have net me a really good undercut on all 3 of these guys. But since I made the mistake of trying to follow them, I was then subject to the pace of all 3 of them, and it looked like because they were battling so much, they were going pretty slow. Now, all 3 of these drivers are fast drivers. Dino, who's in 3rd place right now, is one of the world's fastest. Mr. Plum is always really fast, and Garth is also a good driver. But all 3 of them together in different cars meant that they're going to be hurting each other's pace, and that, of course, with me right behind, is going to hurt my pace. Jumping out to the end of this lap, it's very apparent that they are not going to go in the pits, so it ended up being the very perfect time for me to go in the pits. If I can pull off a clean exit lap, or 2 exit laps when they are out before they go into the pits, then I could net a really good undercut on them. I wanted to show the entire pit stop because I wanted to show exactly how quick it is. And when you do take tires, it's only about 2 seconds slower. So really, unless your car is incredibly good, or if you're really suffering on track position, it's best to take tires. But we were suffering on track position, and I know that this car is pretty good on tires, so I decided against it, and we did have the benefit of coming out in front of our buddy Damien. Also behind him is our friend Baldini, who actually was ahead of us when he went in the pits, so the undercut did indeed work on Baldini. Jumping ahead to the end of the next lap, you can see that Damien actually chose to stay behind me until the perfect opportunity arose for him to pass me. Now, Damien, you might recognize as D Chafe on the leaderboards. My man has multiple world records, and he is just flat out much faster than me. Choosing to wait this long to pass me was actually a strategic decision because if we don't battle and if we don't ruin each other's lap times, then we can ensure that anyone who has yet to pit, who was close to in front of us, when they do go through the pits, they're going to end up behind us. That is the entire concept behind taking an early pit, not taking tires, and then just trying to get as much clean air as you possibly can. Even if the person who is in front of you is slightly slower than you, or maybe a little bit more than slightly slower than you, it might be a better idea just to stay behind them for a while so that you both have really good pace. And as you can see, so many people were going in the pits this lap, and we ended up all the way in 4th and 3rd position. Jumping ahead all the way to the end of the race, I was not able to stay focused long enough to stay with Damien, and Damien, of course, just has incredible pace, so he was able just to pull away from me, but because I didn't have anything else to deal with, I was able to maintain my position, and we finished 3rd and 4th after starting all the way in the back. With stock a full 4.7 seconds behind, we weren't ever really in danger of slowing down too much and losing any positions, but if he was any closer and we did end up battling when he went for the pass, then that could have been a completely different story. I always try to preach this, but it is much better to try to work with someone that you trust until towards the end of the race, and then if you want to, you can then battle. It's better to take 4 or 5 positions than fight someone for a single position and lose 3 or 4. Now, as I mentioned before, the 4C is really the only car in the entire class that can maintain its same pace without taking tires the entirety of the race. The NSX is good on tires, but it's not quite great like the 4C, so if you do choose to take tires, you want to take it somewhere in the middle of the race, and you will have better pace at the end of the race, which is good for defending or attacking. In races where you do want to take tires, the same concept still applies. You still want to go in the pits and come out when there's no one else around you if you can handle it. Now, that's going to be much more difficult, if not impossible, but you're still going to have options. You do not need to just choose a lap to pit on. You have a pit window. I knew that I could maintain a relatively good pace for about 7 laps. So if I make my longest stint about 7 laps or shorter, then I should theoretically be good, which means that I could pit anywhere around lap 4 to lap 7 and I should be fine. If you want to go for a crazy undercut and risk having low pace, you could pit lap 3, or if you know that it's not going to bother you too much to have kind of bad pace on your first stint and then have really good pace on your second, you could pit as late as lap 7. What you really want to do is just keep your eyes up and make sure you're paying attention to what's happening in the race so that you can make the best informed decision. When you race pretty consistently, you're going to start getting to know the people that you race with. And I know V Diesel behind me and Clubsport Pace in front are both very fast drivers. Now, Clubsport Pace made a few mistakes, but I didn't take the chance to try to battle him. I instead pushed him because I knew that if he made a mistake, it was going to be temporary, and I knew that his pace overall was going to be good. V Diesel was doing the exact same thing with me. He recognizes that it's not going to be too detrimental if I make a couple mistakes, but it could be really bad if he wants to battle. So that's why you saw at the very beginning of this very first lap, he was pushing me, I was pushing Clubsport Pace, but it did appear at the beginning of the second lap that I was going to be faster than Clubsport, so I took the opportunity to pass him, and you can see that he's not taking the opportunity to try to pass me after that. If I recall correctly, this is the very first race that I'd seen Clubsport Pace in, so I think he was just getting warmed up. I know he's a fast driver, and he definitely proved it in the other races, but for this race, it looked like he was making too many mistakes, so I did take the opportunity to go ahead and try to pass him. Jumping to the end of lap 3, I had actually wanted to go to at least lap 4 before going to the pits, but then we ran into Comprex and B-Grow. Both of these drivers are pretty quick, but I definitely knew that I was faster and I was already being held up by them, so I wanted to make it very clear I was going to go in the pits and take my position to go in as soon as I could. Luckily, they didn't want to go in the pits either, and so it ended up being the perfect opportunity for me to go in the pits. I just said pits a lot, and so we're going to watch the entirety of the pits. I showed the last one where we didn't take tires. I'm going to show exactly how fast it is when you do take tires. It does not add a lot of time, and these pit stops are really short anyways. You can see that even though we're in the back, we're almost all the way in the back, we did pit before almost anyone else, except Clubsport, who decided not to take tires. Like I mentioned, he is a fast driver, he knows what he's doing. But since we are taking tires, we ended up losing that position, but all is not lost. Jumping almost all the way to the end of the race, it did appear that the slightly fresher tires did make the difference and allow us to get in front of Clubsport, and we didn't run into any traffic until the second to the last lap. This is the power of choosing the right time to go in the pits. When this combo initially dropped, I thought the Lamborghini was going to be the meta car. The Lamborghini, for whatever reason, despite being an all-wheel drive car, has incredible tire wear. I think it's probably a combination of the tune as well as the fact that it is pretty light. Now, 4G Speed and I had actually come together in a previous race, but the guy was kind enough to then give me the position back after it appeared that he had pushed me a little bit wide. So I really respect that. Even if we come together, if you give the position back, it's all good. And it looked like he was going to give me even more space, probably after feeling a little bit bad about that kind of thing. But either way, that guy was a good driver. I really appreciated his sportsmanship, and I look forward to racing him again. Now, our friend Velasa also went off the track, which gave us a free position. But even if that didn't happen, we would have ended up in 5th place here. And that, again, is pretty much all you can hope for when you start from the back and you have to go in the pits really early. This all really does work out really well either way with this car. If you want to take tires, if you don't want to take tires, you have a lot of different options. You don't even have to make your decision before the race starts. Jumping all the way to the end, you can see that we cut off 6/10 off of Bruno in just a single lap. And that really just shows how good this car is. It's really flexible. You can take tires, you can choose not to take tires, you can pit whenever you want to, and it can definitely fight any of the cars on track. As always, thank you very much for watching my video. If you liked what you saw, please don't forget to like and subscribe. And of course, I'll be making another guide every single week. To end, I'm going to leave you with a look at my current members. I love every single one of you. Thank you very much.